Here in the UK, we're undergoing some of the biggest changes to the pension system in a generation. Debbie Harrison is following them for the Pensions Institute here at Cass Business School and joins me now. Debbie, can you just run us through what these changes are?
They really are the biggest for a generation. Most employees in the private sector are not in pension schemes, and the government was very worried that when they retired that they would rely on what is actually quite a small state pension. So they're introducing this system called auto-enrolment, which means that all employers will have to automatically enrol their employees, unless they're very low earners, into the company pension scheme. And it's going to bring, and there's only about sort of, I don't know, 3-4 million people at the moment in these schemes. There's going to be up to another 10 million people coming into the system. So it really is a huge change.
Now, you've produced a report on this, and the main conclusion of the report is in Latin. It's not caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. It's venditor emptor, let the seller beware. What do you mean by that?
Well, the financial services system here in the UK assumes that customers, so if you went to buy a personal pension, that you knew what you were doing, you talked to somebody, you'd recognise what you were being charged. It's a very peculiar system under auto-enrolment because the employee doesn't knowingly buy anything. They are automatically enrolled by their employer into the company pension scheme. They're not aware they've bought a product. And that, although they are the customer, they're the investor, it's the employer who will choose that scheme for them, decide on what they're going to invest in, and also how much they're going to be charged, including the cost of any advice the employer gets. Typically, all of the charges will fall on the member, the employee, but they have no knowledge and no involvement in that whole selection process. So they really are buying blind, in a sense, and trusting that the employer has done the right thing for them.
You're actually suggesting that there perhaps isn't the alignment of interests that there needs to be. The employer doesn't have the long-term investment in this scheme that the employee has.
Well, it varies very much. I mean, our main concern is the smaller companies that don't have any pension arrangements at the moment. You know, it's a very difficult economic climate and the law requires them to do this, but how engaged they are in the process is, you know, remains in doubt, and they may be buying something that their employees are going to rely on that they don't fully understand themselves.
Is there anything that the ordinary worker, the ordinary employee should be doing about this?
Well, it's a very good question. It's a very difficult one because they really have no say in what they are auto-enrolled into. And the problem really, I think, is that the good thing about auto-enrolment is that the employees will get an employer contribution. Now, you could say employers could look at the contract details, and to be honest, most of them will not, because they're not engaged buyers. But if they were savvy enough to do so and thought, well, you know, I'm not sure about this investment fund, I don't like the look of these charges, I've heard, you know, that they look high. If they can opt out, they have the right under auto-enrolment to opt out of the scheme, but then they lose that employer contribution. So, and the employer is under no obligation to pay that contribution into a pension of their own choice.
Because you found that there are huge differences between the schemes.
There are indeed. What we found, I mean, the positive aspect of the report is that charges have always been a big issue for pensions. And in the 1990s, when these defined contribution, these investment-based pensions were introduced, and these are what are going to be used for auto-enrolment, the charges were kind of hidden because we had a roaring bull market, equity market, and so people did generally quite well. Of course, as you will know, since the turn of the century, that has not been the case, and returns have been very poor, so charges really count. We found a huge difference among the older schemes compared with the new ones. So new schemes that are being brought onto the market now actually have generally very good charges, typically about, say, 0.5% or maybe up to 1%. Is the total annual member charge. But on some of the older schemes that could be used for auto-enrolment, the charges are up to 3%. And when we modelled them, we did a huge quantitative modelling exercise, stochastic modelling, we found that the difference in the outcome in terms of what pension would you get varied by up to 100%. So you might get 5,000 out of this scheme as a retirement income for life, but 10,000 out of this scheme for the same contributions. And that was purely down to charges.
So your clear message is to employees, venditor emptor, you have a duty to do this well for your employees?
It falls on the employer, but of course the employer is not regulated under the Financial Services Authority regime. But it does, we are asking, I think, employers to think about what they're auto-enrolling their members into, their employees into. We're also trying to get the message across to the insurance industry and the advisors that they should go back to these older plans if they've got high charges and make sure that they are not used for auto-enrolment.
Debbie Harrison, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.